Hello, my name is Chris with Boise State University. I'm here to talk to you about what the future holds for my research project on sexual assault and sexual victimization within the United States military. Once again, the title of my publication is called "The Cost of Serving Sexual Assault Within America's Military." And over the last several weeks, my research question has evolved a number of times from what it originally was in my last video. Right now, the specific research question we're looking at is what factors most significantly contribute to the rate of sexual assault at the small unit level within the United States Army. So we got a lot more specific with that research question. And when I say small unit level, I'm talking from battalion to company size within the Army. And a battalion will typically consist of 300 soldiers, where a company, there's 2 or 3 companies, maybe even 4 companies in a battalion, and each company could have anywhere from 60 to 100 soldiers. So instead of looking at the entire Army as a whole, we're trying to find factors in that small unit level that contribute to high rates of sexual victimization. We've talked quite a bit about the literature available on this subject. I just had a few more key points I wanted to talk about, specifically from Bell and Reardon. It talks about issues inherent to the military as far as sexual assault and sexual harassment go that you wouldn't necessarily find in the civilian sector. The main point is, in the civilian sector, when a sexual assault occurs, oftentimes the victim and the perpetrator go their separate ways, and hopefully that's the end of it. Hopefully they don't see each other again, don't interact again, and that incident never happens again. However, in the military, the Army specifically, when they're deployed overseas or even in garrison here stateside, a lot of times the victim will have to live and work with their assailant over the course of months or even years. And that's kind of a specific issue to just the military that you don't really find on the civilian sector. Brandt, Maddox, and Haskell was another one of the literature pieces that I looked at. And they did a research in 2010 from the Department of Veterans Affairs. And they found that 15% of the women that were seeking treatment for any reason at the Department of Veterans Affairs had experienced some form of military sexual trauma. And the number one issue that they were having with that was both perceived and real stress on about gender-based violence. And what gender-based violence is any violent act that results in physical, sexual, or psychological harm to a member of the opposite sex, which is exactly what sexual harassment and sexual assault is. One participant in that study, a female that served in Iraq, actually stated that she was more afraid overseas of her male counterpart than of enemy combatants. She was more afraid that she would be harmed by a fellow soldier than by an enemy soldier while serving overseas. I also wanted to clear up on the 2 different types of reporting that I talked about last time, restricted and unrestricted reporting within the military. Now, an unrestricted report goes to a military health professional or a chaplain or military police, whoever the victim wants to tell. And the way the unrestricted report works is that they will then tell the service member's chain of command. They will involve the military police, the provost marshal office, as well as local law enforcement, so that they can investigate the incident as well as file charges against the perpetrator. The other type of reporting is a restricted report, and that forbids health personnel, healthcare people, or chaplains, for that matter, from divulging that information to anybody. There's complete anonymity, and the victim can still seek treatment as well as counseling without any fear of reprisal or fear of fellow service members knowing about the incident. Like I said, there's data available for the characteristics of both victims and offenders within the military, as well as the frequency of military sexual assaults over the last several decades. However, there's not really any studies that I can find that were able to take all the factors associated with military sexual trauma. And by that I mean the command climate, how the chain of command feels about sexual harassment and sexual assault, the place that the attack occurred, the time it occurred, the events leading up to the assault, as well as demographics of both the victim and offender, whether there was alcohol, drugs involved. I haven't found a study that contributes or that combines all those separate factors in order to determine which factors are most prevalent in a sector. Now, for the actual design of the study, we're going to be using a one-shot case study, which will allow us to examine multiple independent variables at the same time and to decide which ones have the greatest impact on the dependent variable. The independent variables we will be using include the demographic for both the victims and offenders, to include age, race, socioeconomic status, number of years served in the military, highest rank achieved in the military, and the position that what they were serving in during the actual assault. We'll ask the participants if there was any sexual misconduct prior to the attack, i.e. sexual harassment in the workplace. And if there was, we will ask the participants what their chain of command's perceived attitude towards the behavior was, whether they condoned and encouraged the sexual harassment or whether they took appropriate action at the time. And we'll also ask specifics about the assault itself, the time of day, the location, the proximity to other people, how many perpetrators were involved, and whether there was alcohol and drugs involved during the incident. Now, the dependent variable will be a completed or attempted rape as defined by the American Medical Association, which is any act that occurred without the consent of the participant involving the use of threat or force of threat, and includes the attempted or completed penetration of the vagina, mouth, or rectum. We're going to expand on that a little bit to include any unwanted sexual touching of any nature, i.e. groping, probing, or fondling. The procedures for the actual study: we will use a cohort of female veterans that served within the United States Army between the years 2005 2012, have since been discharged, and who are seeking treatment through the Department of Veterans Affairs for military sexual trauma. The reason we're going back to 2005 is because that's the year that the Department of Defense implemented their Sexual Assault Prevention and Response Organization, which was actually tasked with eliminating sexual assault within the military. The sampling frame will be gathered from the Department of Veterans Affairs Women's Health Care Center of the Northwest, which includes offices in Portland, Seattle, Salt Lake City, and Boise, Idaho. 2,000 participants will be selected that meet the criteria previously described, and they will be sent an introductory letter via mail, which will include the policies and the procedures and the purpose of the survey, as well as a consent form that's been approved by the Boise State University Institutional Review Board, and a postage-paid return envelope so they can send their consent form back to Boise State once they filled it out and know what the study's all about. This will take place during a 3-month period. Those letters will be sent out between September and November of 2013. Once they have sent their consent form back, they will be called to schedule a phone interview, which will take place between January and March of 2014. The actual interview itself will be a computer-assisted phone survey conducted by female callers. Now, the reason we're using female callers, and they will be trained on how to deal with victims of sexual assault in order to recognize the emotions and the stress associated with that. And the reason we're using those females with that special training is to increase the level of comfort for the participants while they're conducting the survey. The surveyors will ask a series of closed-ended questions pertaining to the independent variables, and that data will be entered manually into an SPSS statistical program. The limitations of this study: obviously, with the emotions and stress and mental anguish associated with sexual trauma, there is a chance that some of the victims will become uncomfortable and emotional while discussing the incident with the surveyors. If for any reason the participant is unable to continue with the survey due to that emotional stress, obviously there will be a little bit of experimental mortality present, which could affect the internal validity of the survey. And the way we're going to deal with that is once again by using the female surveyors who have received training on how to empathize with these victims of sexual trauma. Now, once we have all of our data collected from all of our participants, they will all be combined into one SPSS statistical spreadsheet, and it will be analyzed to determine which factors, if any, are most prevalent amongst the entire population surveyed. And hopefully we can find factors that correlate highly across the entire population, and we can work to implement controls across the entire United States Army. This is a hot issue. I've spent several years serving in the United States Army and find it absolutely appalling that this is such an issue. Sexual assault and victimization within the military is an issue that has the potential to seriously undermine the public's faith in the protection that the armed services offer. After all, if they can't protect their own soldiers stateside, how are they supposed to protect them overseas? Thank you.